Welcome to After. The purpose of After is to connect, inspire, inform, and entertain through the telling of personal stories and experiences, allowing everyday people like you to help everyday people like you. I'm your host, Tommy Johnson. Let's get to today's episode. Today on After, we have a very special guest. We have my sister Grace on. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's going to be awesome.
Of course. I'm excited to chat with Grace. We're going to be talking about something that I think is very, very important and something that people can relate to. And it is Grace's personal discovery, discovering that she is gay. And we're going to talk through that journey. And we'll start off with your childhood. If you could just tell us if you can remember your first introduction or the first time you remember learning that there were other things, other sexualities than straight, if you can think that far back.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I feel like that's a really good question. It wasn't very common to hear about something different. I think I would hear about somebody's like gay uncle or gay family member, and it was pretty it was kind of on the fringes of the culture that I was in. So maybe like a TV character here or there, but I feel like it was always kind of like, oh no, they're gay. So maybe Ellen. I remember hearing that she was a lesbian, and I was like, okay. And so yeah, I think it was pretty like on the outskirts of my experience.
Yeah. So something that wasn't commonly talked about, and then if it was talked about, like you kind of mentioned, it wasn't in the most positive light. So if you could think back again about the first time that you can remember having positive interactions with someone, or just kind of the topic of sexuality where someone's not straight and kind of having a positive experience. Is there anything that comes to mind about, oh, yeah, that was maybe being gay isn't horrible or bad?
Yeah, I would say it wasn't really until high school, sadly. So I was probably about 16 or 17, and I had a friend who I was close to, and but not close enough where they came out to me, but I found out that they were queer, and eventually they came out to me. And I remember just feeling pretty happy for them. And I guess thinking a little bit more, like thinking about school, there were always, for some reason, I feel like more teenage boys in like junior high and high school who were maybe a little bit more like effeminate, and it was much more taboo than like me being more of an androgynous girl or a tomboy girl. And I remember they got bullied, they were called gay in like a very negative way. But I remember I had this other friend later in high school. It was still like not acceptable in that area, but I remember feeling really happy for her, and it was kind of like, oh, that's like something it's not black or white. Like, this is somebody I know, this is somebody I care about. This is just kind of, it made them more complex, and I think it kind of humanized the topic. So yeah, but not until high school, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, especially if we think about life now. and how obviously it's not perfect, but widely accepted LGBTQ people are compared to just
Yeah.
10, 11, 12 years ago. When you talk about, the culture in the area, we grew up Mormon, that
Mhm.
faith teaches that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's the only way to go. And same-sex attraction is the term used, and it's
Right.
seen as like an affliction.
Okay.
And if it's acted upon, it's sinful. So there's no gray area within Mormonism if, in terms of queer folk falling in love and experiencing that relationship, that's a
Yeah.
no-go zone, 100%. And so you talked about that gray area being kind of created because you had this friend who you knew and loved and had this relationship with who was queer, and you're like, how does this add up?
Mhm.
It's kind of challenging that cognitive dissonance. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. And I think it kind of, started eroding some beliefs I had, that framework from the church. And I think I had been the type of member in the church that was a little bit more on the side of like letter of the law, or not letter of the law, spirit of the law, where, it was more about, it's all about love. It's all about, that's why we're here, to become more Christ-like or loving. So I think I felt some dissonance there because I thought, well, this is very like, this is them choosing to love, and what could be like, what's wrong about that? That actually feels like that's in line with a lot of the things I had been taught. So yeah, there were some, that was when things really started to kind of slowly break down.
Yeah, makes sense. You grow up, you meet people, and having real life situations and real life people in your life, it starts to challenge some of those beliefs that you have just held on to, whether that's just because that's what you were taught or whatever the case might be.
Maybe.
That natural challenging of personal beliefs comes up. And so you talk about that coming in high school, outwardly, as your friends are coming out. When would you say about your experience just growing up and like crushes and romance and that just kind of type that lane of life? What was your personal experience? Let's go up to like right when you graduated high school. So like just your, as a kid, what's your personal experience with crushes, liking people? Kind of take it from there.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking about that because I've growing up, I always had crushes on boys, and I remember my earliest crush was this kid named Nick in my kindergarten class, and I thought I liked him, and I was just like intrigued by him. And, I still don't totally understand that, but I had crushes all throughout junior high and into high school. But I would say one thing that I've heard from a lot of queer people, especially, I should say, for people more like me who are really only attracted to the same sex, you kind of are given this script or this default. You assume that you're going to be attracted to the opposite sex. So you kind of find, or at least for me, I found a way to kind of make my life make sense within that paradigm. So I think for a lot of those crushes, I just kind of thought I was supposed to have a crush. So I'd kind of pick somebody, which is really funny. But, I could still tell if somebody was cute or if they were interesting or if I liked the way they dressed or if there were things that I was attracted to, but I really think I thought I was supposed to have a crush for a lot of those years. And one thing that I interpreted as me having a crush was I would get these feelings like on a date. I didn't date a lot. I've never kissed a guy, so it was always very like solitary. My crushes, like they never really acted out in any way. So if I was around them, or let's say we were like on a date, I would feel this discomfort that I assumed meant I felt this nervousness. I assumed it meant that I liked them or that I had a crush on them, and or like kind of the feeling of butterflies in my stomach. And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but once I really felt that type of nervousness that people talk about in the way of like a crush, I was like, oh, it was totally different. I think before really feeling that towards girls, I think I was just nervous and really uncomfortable. Like it just kind of didn't feel right. But because of the paradigm and the script I had been given, I kind of fit those feelings within that script and tried to make it make sense. And I even remember like growing up, I really didn't like love songs. I've written music since I was a kid. And once I started writing with lyrics, really none of the songs were about love. I thought they were kind of corny. I just didn't get it and I remember they started to make sense once I actually started to have feelings. But yeah, so that was kind of my experience. I think I didn't feel this kind of brings in the culture of the church, but I didn't really date guys, and I think probably my sexuality played into that. But I remember feeling a lot of not shame, but like there was no hope for me at a very young age. I was like, oh wow, like guys just aren't into me. And I remember feeling this pressure to be interesting to boys, and I didn't feel that a lot. So that kind of compounded what I was going through subconsciously. So yeah.
Yeah, a lot of things I want to talk about from that answer. That was a great answer. You talked about kind of being. I mean, we're all placed within a system, and we don't know it when we're a child. What we experience, we consider that's how life is, and it's not until we grow older and travel and meet new people and whatnot, then we discover there's so many ways of life. But to our own understanding, this is what life is. And so you, all of us, but we're specifically talking about you, were placed in a heteronormative world. And so you were tasked with discovering what getting a crush means and liking someone means, because you're learning in songs, shows, family, friends, that everyone at some point has a crush and everyone at some point likes somebody. And so you're feeling these nervous feelings and you're like, I guess this is me liking somebody. These are the crush feelings. And like you talked about, and I do want to talk about it in a little bit once we get to that point of the story, but it makes me think of like, if someone is given a Hershey's bar and when they're young and someone's like, this is the world's best chocolate, and you taste it and you're like, wow, this is good, because Hershey's is good. And you think for years that this is the best chocolate ever. And then you meet someone from Switzerland and they are from a chocolate heir family. And you go to their house and they're like, have you ever had, I don't know, this kind of chocolate, Swiss chocolate? And you're like, no, but I've had Hershey's, and oh my gosh, best chocolate in the world. And they're like, okay, have some Swiss chocolate. and you eat it and you're like, oh my gosh, I did not even know this existed. This is the best thing
Mhm.
ever. Wow, there was actually something better than
Mhm.
Hershey's? I just didn't even know. But that doesn't mean that the Hershey's was not good, but that from your frame and from just the framework that you were given, that was what was supposed to be the best one. And it wasn't until later that you tasted something out or tasted something and tried something out that, oh, there's more out there. And you actually
Yeah.
learn, oh, that's like legit chocolate. That's the good stuff.
Mhm.
And then you talk about the culture, about trying to be like interesting for guys. And that's an interesting point. Because within the church, marriage is more than just cool and like nice, but it's required to be
Yeah.
exalted, is the
Mhm.
Mormonism term. The best of the best in the afterlife and beyond. And so it really is like an audition. Like when we watch these movies with like nature movies, and there's the male species or the male of whatever species is like dancing and doing
Yeah.
kind of like funky stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of the pressure that's put on women within Mormonism to, like you said, make yourself interesting. So then you're picked. So then you can be in heaven and have this
Mhm.
exalted life and try to kind of audition and be there. And so you're trying to do all of this. You're auditioning for something that you have been told is the only way to do it. And yet
Mhm.
subconsciously, like you're talking about, it's just not fitting in to your normal true self. There's like this
Yeah.
battle going on. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's yeah, really accurate. And I think that the interesting thing about like the chocolate analogy, which I do like, is like not only is the Swiss chocolate so much better, but you're told that it's really bad for you. And so then you have this dissonance where it's like, well, I know that I like this more. Like I know I'd rather have this than that, but now there's some moralistic thing attached to it. That can be really, really confusing, you know?
Yeah. And to take that from a hypothetical to your personal experience,
Mhm.
when did you begin to question things for yourself? Was there an experience where before, again, the assumption was that's never going to happen, that's not me, that's bad, that's wrong?
Mhm.
When was the first time when you started kind of putting question marks to those beliefs
Mhm.
for yourself?
Yeah, like just around my sexuality.
Where
Yeah.
it was like, I'm straight, I'm straight, I'm straight because straight is good and straight is awesome, to
Mhm.
like, maybe I'm actually
Maybe
not
not.
straight.
Yeah. It wasn't until I was 21. It's kind of wild, but I was living in Provo. I was going to UVU, but living with friends who were going to BYU. And I wasn't really dating guys at all. And I have this, pattern where I get a really close female friend. We become really close. And which, again, kind of in the framework of society isn't too uncommon. So it worked. Like it wasn't, that itself wasn't strange, but I just had this pattern, and a lot of the times they'd end up coming out to me, which was interesting. And it wasn't like I like you; they were just coming out to me. And so I had some practice, I guess, kind of having people in my life who were queer. Um, and kind of being able to say, like, I don't agree with the church's stance on that. So I'd gotten to a point where I was, kind of having my own ideas around things and kind of having more of an individualistic approach. And then for myself, I was still going to the singles ward in Provo on BYU campus, and I was really devout. I was always pretty devout in terms of church attendance. I never really skipped unless I was by myself and felt too scared, because it did feel like dating. It felt like everyone was flirting, and I felt really uncomfortable. But I met this girl in my ward, and she was an amazing violinist, and she was kind of different, and in terms of just like her own style, and she liked really interesting movies and really cool music, and I was like, oh yeah, I want to be friends with her, and I like her vibe. And so we started playing in like sacrament meeting together. I'd play piano and she'd play violin, and I think we played again Relief Society together. And I remember she came out to me as bisexual, and at that point I was like, oh, it's great, thanks for telling me. And a few months later, I remember like we would be hanging out, watching a movie, and I remember feeling like, okay, yeah, like I want to cuddle with her, or I want to hold her hand. And that really freaked me out. That really scared me initially, because I didn't really understand it. And mostly, I think I had never really let myself be open to feeling those things, which I can go into, because I think that's kind of an interesting topic, like blocking those thoughts out. But I just kind of, at some point, I kept wanting to spend all my time with her. I kept wanting to go to all these events with her, and eventually it kind of came out, no pun intended, that I was feeling things. And she had a pretty terrible experience while at BYU, dating a girl and having to go testify before the honor code court because her roommates reported her, and it was really traumatic. And so she kind of was just basically like, I'm not going to date a girl again. And I didn't even really want to date her, but I just was having these new feelings and just kind of wanted to somebody about them. But sadly, we didn't really have, I think it just kind of freaked both of us out, and we both just wanted to stay friends, but, it started to get really complicated. Where did the lines between romantic and platonic start to blend, especially in female friendships? A lot of, and probably, but I'm a girl, so I just, those lines became a little blurry. So at that point, I was like, okay, this is feeling really real for me, really scary, really real, exciting, happy, terrifying. And I was still going to church, but I had started kind of developing more of I guess you could have called me like a progressive man, nuanced man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was already kind of okay being in that gray space, but I knew that if I chose to kind of really embrace this part of myself, as in kind of explore it, that could have some consequences. So I really, that was like in February, this experience with this girl. And the whole summer, I was kind of a mess. I was having panic attacks all of the time. I was really anxious, and I lost a bunch of weight, and people had no idea. Like, they were asking me how I was losing weight and kind of celebrating it. And I was like, oh, I'm just honestly forgetting to eat. And it was just a really intense time. And I remember our oldest niece was born in May that year, 2018. And I was feeling pretty suicidal. More just like it was just I was waking up and I wanted to go to sleep. Like it was living was just really tumultuous and scary. And so it was just exhausting, kind of moving through all those emotions. And I remember she was born and I just remember thinking, it was kind of sad, but I just remember thinking like, I want to know her and that's going to keep me going for right now. Like it was kind of getting to that point and I hadn't told anybody. And I was just, really, really confused. And by the fall, I remember kind of hitting this point where it was like, I have to do something. Like I feel like I've been trying to stay in this nuanced space for a while. And but this feels more, it felt urgent and maybe I was kind of ruminating on it. I tend to ruminate, but it was really exciting too. Like I was excited about the prospect of kind of feeling those feelings with somebody. So we were on a family vacation actually in Park City, and I watched my first episode of Mormon Stories, and I downloaded Tinder, and I was like feeling really, really nervous, and then I matched with this girl and ended up going on a date with her. And then things started kind of quickly unraveling after that with church and with coming out to people. But I think I answered the question. I can't remember the original question.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
But,
I do have a question about something that we'll jump back into this part of the timeline. But you talked about this experience, kind of this first experience where you allowed yourself to maybe for the first time really consider some of these thoughts and feelings that came to you about wanting to cuddle, wanting to hold hands, wanting to show your feelings through this physical way, which again, when those feelings become physical, that's the big no-no within Mormonism. And it also is just taboo culturally in America, and especially at that time too. Again, things are getting better, but at that time, and just your personal experience and world view in that part of America. I mean, again, you mentioned this particular friend of yours was going to an institution that still to this day bars that type of behavior. So you mentioned that before this experience with this girl, that there had been potentially feelings, those thoughts and feelings, but you were blocking those out. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think I must have been because I think they've probably always been there in the mix.
And so, so is there that first time to allow those thoughts and feelings to stay in your head longer than ever before? What was that like? I know you talked about there being this excitement and this fear being together. And that was the root of the stress for that summer, that February to fallish time, where it's these dueling things where one is like, this is so awful, and the other one's like, this is actually so amazing. If you could, I know it's a tough subject, but if you could just explain to us how that kind of went in your head, and if you can remember some of the times of just feeling those competitive really strong, these kind of truths, things that you took both as truth, like competing against each other. Just if you could just explain what that really felt like to be just feeling those things in that moment.
Yeah, that's a great question. I might back up a little bit, kind of, because I've thought about this, kind of wondered why I never really felt things. I think honestly, and this might be an American thing, it might be a human thing, it might be and definitely an LDS church, but I feel like I was celebrated in my virtuousness. I was encouraged to avoid impure thoughts and to, stay clean, stay chaste. So that thought stopping, which I think is what I was doing a lot of the times, probably there were a lot of layers there. So I honestly wasn't even thinking like, oh, that girl's cute. I can't think. It was almost deeper than that. It was almost like I just didn't even, it was like that passageway wasn't even open. So that tension really wasn't there a lot of my adolescence. And it was celebrated that I was not having a healthy sexual exploration in my teenage years. Like it wasn't healthy, but it was celebrated. And I also think something that I've kind of aligned with a term, an identity label, and it's depends on the person, but I don't know if you've ever heard of demisexual. That
I'm
rings it
not
off.
too familiar, but you can explain it to us.
Yeah, it kind of falls under the asexual umbrella, but really what it is I don't really feel a sexual interest in somebody until I have a pretty deep emotional connection with them. And so I've never really looked at anybody and thought like, or felt anything until I really know them. Friends or just have some kind of emotional tie. So I think, and I don't really know how it is for everybody else. Again, like the script, I just kind of fit myself in the script. So I don't know how everybody else does that. But I think that added layer kind of made it so I didn't see girls and immediately think, oh, they're so beautiful, I'm feeling attracted to them in that way. It just kind of was a little bit less urgent for me, those types of attractions. So I probably just got really good at stopping anything from getting to that point, because I just assumed they were close friends, which they were and are. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, totally.
Some layers there.
For sure. So yes, there wasn't this constant battle where you would, look at a girl and start thinking like, oh man, she's really pretty. I want to date her like that. And then you would have to shut that down.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you went, as you've talked about, until you were 21 to really understand this part of you, because that part just hadn't really been even tested or introduced or familiar with. So that was like your first time really having to confront these feelings that were, again, within the worldview that you had not approved. Those didn't even show up until your early 20s.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the layer of having it being celebrated or congratulated that I wasn't fantasizing about boys or watching porn at all. Like I was really good at just thought stopping it. And I think having that kind of layer with demisexuality made it a lot easier because it just wasn't, is a little harder for me to access. So,
Yeah, I saw a funny reel of someone who is gay and he's left the church, but
again,
he said that growing up he used to think he was just so amazing
again,
at not thinking impure thoughts about women, and they'd always get these lessons about like, you got to stop those thoughts when they come into your mind, and he's like, when? I'm so good they don't even come to my mind.
he's like, are
And
you
then
projecting?
he's like, wow, you guys have problems. Because
Yeah.
like, it's not hard at all to not think of a girl in that type of way. It's actually very easy,
Yeah.
which I thought was funny. But it
That's
kind
good
of,
to know. Yeah.
and so yeah, because again, like you said, like just with the worldview of and just the script that you were given and the indicators of a good person, one of those things would be like to not have sexual thoughts, and the assumption is about the opposite sex, and so you're like, man, I am cruising.
Yeah.
I'm actually very good.
Yeah.
And then, like, blessed are those who don't think of impure things. You're like, man,
yeah. A virtuous
you guys struggle
woman.
with this?
Mm-hmm.
And
It was kind of a
it's-
holier than like, oh, wow, I'm doing okay. Like, I think I would compare myself to other people and be like, hey, I must be doing something right because I'm not struggling with that, which is kind of sad that that's in the culture, or maybe that was just me, but I did that.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's unique to just you. I think there are these different markers of, okay, if I'm doing this really well or not well, like that is a indicator of my righteousness
DJ.
or devotion. And so, it's not wild, in my opinion. It's not wild for you to have thought, man, I must be doing something really well, because these aren't even, like, Satan's not even coming after me with this stuff. Like, whatever armor of God I'm putting on by reading and my scriptures and going to church and whatever, like, it must be very good.
Yeah.
Because my defenses are not picking up anything.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The honor of God.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. So good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so you start to understand more of yourself. And yet you're still in this culture, church that is talking against it. Yeah, so not just saying it's like it's not neutral. It's this is bad. And so you're going through this process that is really affecting you to your core, because what for you was different on the good side of things when you had discovered this sexuality beyond straight? Because you talked about how it was scary and exciting, and we talked a lot about the scary stuff. But what kind of stuff was exciting to you with this discovery that was challenging the scariness? Because the scariness was high, but the excitement had to have been high as well. And that was what was causing so much distress, because it's like, oh, there's these two really powerful competing things.
Things.
And so what was like to you, I guess, to first learn, if we go back to the example that there is actually Swiss chocolate
Right.
available to you, and you've been having Hershey's this whole time, or maybe even, I don't know,
Butterfinger.
Skittles, and being told that
Skittles.
it's chocolate or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know, just like whatever. And you're like, wait, actually, this is available to me? This is what the love songs are talking about? This is what the cheesy little love poems are talking about? What was that like for you to experience that for the first time in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it was just blissful, you know? I mean, it felt like this just release of this desire to really connect with somebody in a way that felt really all-encompassing. And looking back, I think, I think at the core of a lot of human emotion is just a desire to feel significant, the desire to feel just wanted, and the desire to feel or to connect with. I mean, I think that's what we all want. So I think to feel that in such a strong way, and to kind of, I mean, I was, I kind of, I mean, for the fact that the church, I mean, it really pushes the straight narrative, but I mean, at the core of it is it's about love and connection and family, and I think I really think that's a pure kind of love, you know, kind of having community and unconditional love. I think that's beautiful, and sadly, I do think it becomes kind of conditional. Um, but I think I felt like I was finding that. Like it was like, oh, I've found this thing that's really pure and feels really connective and feels really like I leave a date and I just want to keep spending time with that person. I'd never really had that. I'd go on dates with guys and it would just be like, I want to go home. It was like a real discomfort that was really dissonant. But to go on a date with somebody and to want to have great conversation with them, to go enjoy an activity that we both liked, to just kind of keep talking and want to keep talking and feel sad to say bye, and to like the extent of like beyond friendship. I mean, that's just the best feeling in the world. And where I hadn't felt that really until I was 21. And before that, I think maybe I did have experiences that were kind of being fogged up by, you know, denying my sexuality, but to really let myself experience that. I mean, there's nothing for me, nothing compares to that type of connection. It's just amazing. And being able to be really authentic and say, you know, this is my truth and I'm going to own it. I also think that's me connecting to myself. That's me saying, okay, you know, it's all just about connection to one another, to everything around us. So I think that type of liberation, it felt really liberating. It was just kind of like, it can't go back. That's how it felt. It's like, I've got to kind of figure this out and it's going to be messy, but it was like Pandora's box. Once I opened it, I couldn't do that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Once you feel that way and know what is the cause of that, and that not, and so, well, on one hand, it's like, oh, okay, I figured more of this out. I've discovered more about myself. I was told that this one way is the right way and the happiest way. And then for me, it's not. And there's that excitement, but then there's, you know, those consequences of what's being told are the consequences of such behavior. And it's not little stuff. It's not, you might, I don't know, get, I don't know, it's a small thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even like, yeah, you might lose an hour of sleep or something. It's like you are literally not going to be happy now or forever. And with your family forever.
Right.
It's huge stuff. Right. It's huge stuff. So when held up against that background, it is sadly not uncommon and so sadly not surprising to hear its effect on you. And that it was so strong and went to some really deep, dark places. Yeah. And I'm so obviously grateful I'm happy that I have some spoilers about where the story goes. Well, let's keep the story going because we left where you had gone on this date. You downloaded Tinder. You were going on dates with a particular girl. Let's keep the story going and let's start from there.
Yeah. I went on a date with a girl, and I mean, it was just kind of getting to know her. Nothing really came from it other than I had my first kiss with her, and that was my first kiss ever. And it was like, okay, yeah, I actually wanted that to happen. That was awesome. And, we kind of ended things, and, I just started kind of dating more. And around that time, I did come out to a few people, including mom and dad. I think, yeah, to you. I remember I came out to you I think I came out to you before mom and dad. I can't quite remember, but on coming out day, I think ironically, then I came out to you.
Yes.
So, and yeah, I mean, and the culture around coming out is really, really interesting too to me, but that's kind of a sidebar.
Well, I would like to talk about that because that's not something that everyone does.
True.
Like straight people don't come out.
Yeah.
And so if I could just interrupt for a second about what did it feel like to come out? What worries were there? Can you just talk about that first time coming out to someone who knew, I guess, quote, knew you as straight? So you had to kind of like fix the record because obviously you weren't coming out to people that you were meeting to go out on dates with. That's the
right
established thing while you're swiping,
right. Yeah.
No surprise there. But to me, to our parents, to other people,
yeah,
what was that like?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, it was overly positive, but for me, there was, it's just this anticipatory thing where if you've known somebody your whole life and there is this kind of template for who you are, or, kind of, like once you come out, you can't unless you have a new epiphany about yourself or it's, I don't know that, it doesn't, you can't really go back in. So there is kind of this anticipatory thing, even if, I was lucky, I was very, very lucky knowing that if I came out to you and came out to our family, I would still be accepted. It might be kind of clunky, or I didn't really know the ins and outs, or if it would cause some distance, but I knew like I wasn't going to be judged heavily or unwelcome. And that is a privilege. Not everybody has that. So even with that, I was still pretty nervous. With some friends, I would come out to them and they would make comments, that were a little hurtful, just kind of maybe uneducated. I think sincere, but, maybe just not the most, like trusting of me and well experienced. And that was a little painful. And what I will say is I think for pretty much not every person, but there were people that I knew weren't going to accept me mostly because of things I had heard them say. Maybe coworkers that I knew pretty well, and we would get talking about politics and whatever. And I knew, and I didn't really want them to know that about me. I didn't feel safe, so I just chose not to. And from that, I realized, the way that we talk, the way that we speak about people who are seemingly not around us, and sexuality is interesting because it can be hidden, unlike a lot of other identity markers. The way that we talk about other people kind of implies or tells people how much they can trust us. So that was very interesting Well, as I was kind of coming out, I was pretty selective, and I kind of got to the point where I was like, if they're not going to accept me, and I'm just not going to worry about it. And that's sad because that lowers the amount that we can get to know each other, and the intimacy of humanity that we can have with each other. But it just kind of became more important to only come out to people who would accept me. And I think the interesting thing, kind of a sidebar, is I'm still constantly coming out, and I think for a lot of queer people, unless it's really, really obvious that you're queer, you're always a little bit in the closet, and not usually by choice. And because of this, script that we have, we just maybe kind of assume people are in these certain camps or whatever. So I'm constantly kind of gauging, like at a job, when people are talking about their kids and their families, it's like, do I want to open this up to where, maybe it could make things kind of weird? Because I have had things that make things weird, or I've been outed at work and it hasn't been great. So I think that's, at this point, like, I'm kind of used to just casually coming out. If I'm in a group of people who I know are chill, I'll just be like, yeah, I'm my girlfriend and I blah, blah, blah. And I just outed myself. But, that's kind of I haven't talked to a lot of queer people about that, but there's kind of because of the way society is so binary, so heteronormative, there's, you're just kind of constant and closeted, or at least I am.
Yeah, I appreciate that that insight, because Madison and I, we just wrapped up watching Euphoria on HBO Max, and there's just a really quick part in the show where these two old friends reunite, and they say, yeah, one says, yeah, I've been dating this person and I like him, and the person goes, oh, what's his name? And then they go, her name. And then they just kind of laugh it off. Yeah. They're like, oh yeah, duh, like, or whatever. But that is something that just that doesn't happen to straight people. That just doesn't happen.
Right.
And it's just a thing that straight people don't have to do, or straight passing people have to do. And it's something that, like you pointed out, you constantly are coming out in little ways all the time, every day, with any stranger. And that's just an action that a ton of people will never have to do, just because of what is the norm is heterosexuality. And so the assumption from day one is someone's straight. And so that continual having to share something that's not obvious about yourself, but is such an important part about yourself, and something like just having a partner, just the language of like, oh yeah, this is my girlfriend. That just totally, you're sharing such a vulnerable part of you, an important part of you, to a stranger that you don't know sometimes how they're going to react and whatnot. That's an act of courage every single time. And I'm sure there's some days where you're like, I just don't want to deal with, I don't want to be courageous today. I'm worn out. Is that fair to say? Or there's days where you're just like, why can there, like, this is just an extra thing and I just don't want to deal with it?
Yeah, I think I've kind of crafted my life at this point where I'm kind of in spaces where it's not going to be a big deal. But there's still times, like, I've gone to the doctor's office and they ask me questions and I'm like, I feel like, are you sexually active? And I'm like, I feel like I don't know what this question's really asking. Like, so I'm like, I'm queer, so take that for what you will. And I've had some really weird responses from doctors. Or they like give me blood tests for HIV without asking me. And it's kind of like, okay, maybe I'm reading into that. Maybe that's a microaggression. Maybe that's this, maybe that's that. And I mean, at the end of the day, I'm like, well, whatever. Like it's not super harmful, but um, I think I have, had to learn that there are some spaces, either work wise or socially, religiously, where I would need to be a little bit more courageous and kind of stand out a little bit more. And I don't really want to do that all the time. Um, so I've kind of, I feel like intentionally over the past 6 years since coming out, just kind of found my space where it's not anything groundbreaking, you know? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really scary for a lot of people when they come out initially. If you're not in that type of space, it can be really frightening. And a lot of queer people will kind of create a chosen family where they don't have to be courageous all the time to be their authentic self. So I don't think it's uncommon in the queer experience, but um,
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing about you've been able to cultivate this space. You've been able to create this circle and kind of have now compared to when you first came out, just you've just learned more. That's what happens with time and experience, and you've created
yeah,
these spaces. If you could, if you were to think about the that space between that kind of that February to the summertime time where
yeah.
things weren't going so well when you were 21. If you were able to talk to that Grace right now,
Fiji,
what would you say to her?
the well, the I think I would tell her to be okay with embracing the messiness of the process and the messiness of life in general. Um, and to, keep going. And the password I set for my laptop at that time, and it's still my password, which I probably shouldn't say it. I'll change it after this, it's don't give up. And I still, live by that. And, um, but I think a lesson I've had to learn, going into my late 20s now, has been just life is messy. And even though I got through that and it was really liberating and euphoric, I wish I could say it's all been awesome, but it was for the first little bit, but life got hard again and I had to kind of learn new lessons. And I've been queer throughout that, and just kind of learning to embrace the messiness. I think that's one of the best lessons that I've learned. And I kind of had this idea that it should all kind of be neat, and if my life wasn't messy, if it was peaceful, then I was doing something right. It was confirming that I was living in a good way. But really, it's about embracing the messiness and kind of uh, going along with that journey.
Yeah, that's a great insight. That messiness isn't a sign of or a consequence of poor decision making or any sort of negativity, but just an inevitable part of existing.
Gigi.
And that peace and quietness isn't necessarily proof that everything that you're doing is right either.
Right.
Again, that's a shift from what I understand because I was there and going through similar things. That's against some of the ideas that we were taught in our childhood. For that
Gigi.
messiness is just proof of life, and
Yeah.
that it's always going to be there. And the best thing to do isn't to try to get it out, but to best get yourself into a place where you can handle it the easiest or the best or most authentic, strongest way that you can, and just embrace it, learn from it, kind of meet it where it's at, and kind of go from there.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
so, yeah. So you had this, you talked about you came out to your close ones, close family, close friends.
Mhm.
And you're in a space now where your self acceptance of your sexuality is where it's at a good, healthy space. When you were first feeling these feelings and kind of going through this discovery mode, were you ever fearful that that time would never come? That you would never be able to fully lean into what you were at that time just perceiving or just beginning to understand as this more authentic part of yourself? Was that ever a fear? And if
Mhm.
so, what were those fears?
Hey. Yeah. It might sound kind of weird, but I kind of felt like, I guess I've always had this idea that if I am aligning with who I am, and if I'm kind of um, listening to that, that inner voice, um, that things will kind of work out. I think it was kind of getting to the point where I accepted it. That was really tricky, and maybe I'm romanticizing it now, but I think I just felt like, no, like this is kind of, I've felt a little off a lot of my life in this area. This feels a lot more on. So I'm going to trust that and kind of own it and go with it. And it'll probably be really hard. Um, at the time, I think I was thinking that God was kind of guiding me. I felt like whatever the Holy Ghost had felt like my whole life, that's what it felt like. It felt like, no, this is okay. Like, trust yourself, trust your own divinity, just trust your own, not in like the LDS sense, but just like your own um whole self. And once I kind of accepted that this was part of me, and it felt like, okay, yeah, I'm being myself. I I I felt like, I don't know, maybe I should have had, or not should have, but I just kind of figured I'd meet somebody, which thankfully I have, and I did. Um, so yeah, I don't know. That's kind of not answering your question in the way that I thought it. Kind of how it's from.
Yeah, whatever it was is the right answer. But I can see what you're saying about just having these different kind of ideas about what it would turn out, and just you felt a confidence through whatever it was. Like you had been taught that if that you are aligned to that small inner voice, then things are going to
PTA.
work out, and like that's the path that you should go. That's the voice that should take precedent. Like that's the thing that you can trust the most.
Mhm.
And so just leaning into trusting that, and it has worked out. So like who's to say that that was a naive or silly or not the right way or whatever way to think, because it has turned out. So a win is a
True.
win.
True. Yeah.
But yeah, just learning that, that inner voice is beyond a simple correct, it's more than just what your worldview was at some point of this is a different being speaking to me in a deep religious soulful way. But maybe this is actually just my intuition, my true authentic inner conscience poking through and guiding me beyond just my normal way of thinking, and just leaning into that and trusting that being true to those things will work out. And it has.
Yeah. And I think at the time I thought, like, in terms of, with the church, I had spent a lot of time in my teenage years really trying to nurture this relationship with like the higher power. And I didn't love, the organization level or aspect as much of the church, but I really, really like this idea of connecting with something, even if it wasn't necessarily a person, but just, maybe values, ideas, just kind of that we're all part of something, even if it's not that we're going to heaven, just that we're connected. And I think I'd had some pretty spiritual experiences, I guess, with that, just where I felt this deep love for people around me. And I think that really helped carry me through this experience. Not to make this sound like a testimony, but, I when I realized that I was queer, it was kind of like, well, for one, I was like, I don't want to be a part of a church where this isn't okay, because this just makes sense. Like, this is what this higher power feels like in me when I feel it for other people, like this just all-encompassing love, or whatever you might call it. So I kind of fought that. And also I felt kind of like, why have I been nourishing this connection with the higher power that I feel like is telling me, yeah, Grace, this is you. Like, this is you being aligned. This is you being true to yourself and owning it. Why am I nourishing that when the organization level is telling me it's wrong? What do I listen to? That was really confusing. And ultimately I realized, well, this feels more like love. This feels more like all the good things I've been learning about. And I feel really grateful for that. And I wish that was more of the focus for a lot of organized religions, but things get a little messy, I think, again.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of religious groups will advocate for that nurturing, but then guide of what is acceptable, of what that nurturing looks like. And if you get certain answers that don't fit their prescribed answers, then they discredit what you felt.
Try again.
Your answers. Yeah, like
pray hard, pray harder.
Pray hard. Yeah, plug it. Unplug it and plug it back in. And ask again.
Blow on it. Dust it off.
Exactly. Yeah. Error 404. There's some miscommunication, but yeah. I really appreciate that insight of that you had been building this connection to something greater than yourself, and even just a greater part within yourself. And when it became at odds with something that was going on with a big influence in your life, something as big as your religion, your lifetime religion, that you were brave enough to follow the unseen path, but you had nurtured this deep connection with this influence that you trusted to get you to where you wanted and needed to go. And you followed that, and you're here now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's
I know.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's been really, really special.
Well, Grace, I want to thank you for chatting with me. I think discussions around this topic are very important, and your story in particular, for anyone who's heard me talk about my personal journey with Mormonism and whatnot, was very impactful to me and is impactful to me. So thanks for talking with me and going through that with me and just sharing your story today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of After. If you like what you heard, please consider leaving a 5-star review for the podcast on whichever platform you're listening on. A big thank you to my sister Grace for writing and recording the theme music. Until next time, I'm Tommy Johnson. Here's to hoping you find peace of mind, hope, and happiness before, now, and after.